Good.
Can you guys
Yes.
hear me?
Yeah.
My apologies. I was having issues logging into Zoom. How's your morning starting off so far?
De maravilla.
Yeah, chilla.
Yes.
What's up? I might have to end class sooner than expected because I'm actually like I have to deal with some situation. So I probably have to head back to New York as a result. But because of that, obviously, like I have to get everything set up, prepped up, all that stuff, so that way I can have enough time to make it on the plane and go through TSA. And if they trying to do a corona swab or something like that, doesn't catch me by surprise, all that stuff. But just giving you the heads up, I'm most likely gonna have to end today earlier, but it'll just be for today that I'll end it this early. So, well, based on our conversations from the last 2 days about women, like, have you guys had a little bit of time to reflect or to think about like the different scenarios and how it affects women, how the criminal justice system affects women, and obviously it affects us in return? Like, have you guys had some time to think about it? And not even the criminal justice system, but like, I guess the certain crimes that are done against women, such as human trafficking. Like, what are some of your thoughts?
I read that like I saw the site that they come from like Mexico in a specific place called Tulcingo, which is like around where I'm from. Well, my parents are from, but
Yeah.
that was surprising to me that like half of them come from there. I think it was on one of your sites.
Right.
Interesting.
Well, I mean, it would make sense for a lot of trafficking victims to come from other countries because of the fact that, if they try to report themselves to the police or report what's happening to them to the police, that's pretty much a free ticket to get arrested. You know what I'm saying? Because at the end, police, they're not really concerned with trying to follow, like they're not really concerned with trying to figure out what's the specifics behind the situation as much as just quote unquote dealing with it, right? So that's something to keep in mind. But of course, we did see, statistically speaking, Hispanics and Asians are more likely to be used for like labor trafficking than they are for sex trafficking, at least compared to the white and the black community. More so the black woman community. So, but it definitely still happens in the Latin community, of course, and in all communities. But for people to get smuggled from outside the country and then brought here without documentation or any of that, like, it will make perfect sense in order to keep that machine going because they can't really report anything. What are some other thoughts y'all had?
My thoughts on women, especially in like just regular industry, we see women being underrepresented. Like you said, yesterday or was it Monday? Like in the you rarely see a woman that is a billionaire, and even in the beauty industries, like for the past couple of days, all beauty industries have been calling have been showing their like diversity, percentage, and we see women on the low spectrum, and it's women that is setting, the beauty standards and everything, especially black women setting the beauty standards. But they want, but the disparities across, employment and everything is just so drastic. And if we don't want, paying you to make money, Why are we not, getting hired the same way men are? Why are we not making money
Right.
the same way men are?
No, it's a fact. And, it kind of goes back to the convo yesterday, and I think Mel was the one that brought this point up. It's the fear of the power that women actually possess, because women have the ability to be more calculated and think more in sense of the long term as opposed to the short term. So there's just, statistically speaking, more favorable outcomes for women when it comes to just being just tactical individuals. You know what I'm saying? Where men, as Mel said, it was like men are just more in your face, in your grill, straight to the point, and that's it. You know what I'm saying? But throughout time, like, we see that, that's like women are coming more to the forefront. Like Atlanta has a female mayor that it seems like everybody generally respects, and you know what I'm saying. And for a while, like, everybody respected Hillary Clinton until the last elections, when a lot of her shady activities came to light. So, it's just one of those things that, unfortunately, if the person at the top is seeking to oppress, it's going to be very difficult to undo that, at least in the near future. Okay, so today we are going to get into the dope game. Basically, it's going to be talking about different elements of the drugs, the war on drugs, and other things of that nature. Off the top, does anybody know what the war on drugs is?
That was a epidemic in the 70s where the government would like take drugs and they would like push it into the communities of color, like Black communities, and then when the Black communities would use the drugs, they would like arrest them.
Exactly. So basically, they and that's one part of it. They basically pumped the communities with drugs, because one thing to keep in mind is, like, just think about it like this: does cocaine grow in the United States?
No.
Okay. Does opium grow in the United States?
I'm gonna say no again.
Right. Opium grows in Afghanistan. Like, a large portion of the opium used for drugs is grown out in the Middle East, and cocaine, generally speaking, is like grown in like Central, South American countries, things of that nature. So the soil over here can't even produce that, basically. So basically, you have to think, okay, that's the start of it all. Like, if you can't grow it, you can't do anything. What's the next step? Okay, people gotta grow it, then they gotta import it. Do the neighborhood drug dealers, around the corner, up the block, do they have access to flying all these drugs into the community?
No.
No, because they're small time drug dealers, and a lot of them, yes, they're Black or they're Hispanic. But if you look throughout the United States, because the U.S., like I said, throughout the past couple classes, is predominantly white, there's just as much drug dealing and drug use in the white community as there is in the Black and Hispanic community. But that oftentimes gets ignored, or a little twist gets put on it. Oh, it's a health crisis. It's not a criminal situation. Well, Black and brown people didn't get that same leniency back in the 80s when it was the war on drugs and the crack era. You know what I'm saying? But now, because white folk are dying at a high rate due to the fact that they're the ones that mainly use opium and heroin and stuff like that, like, obviously all of it comes back to like it being a health issue, because now it's affecting the community of the majority. So ultimately, what I'm saying with all this is, the war on drugs Yeah, we see the after effects in our communities, but that's not really where it started. Off the top, does anybody know who coined the term war on drugs? Like who actually came up with that term?
It was the president, but I forgot. I don't know if it
It was
was.
Reagan.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ronald Reagan put the war on drugs into full effect, but it was actually President Nixon that came up with the phrase. So he came up with the phrase, and then Ronald Reagan basically just put it into action. Um, but the war on drugs, it was literally that. It was supposed to be like a war on drugs, saying drugs are bad, drugs, will kill you, this and that, and even drugs like marijuana. You know what I'm saying? Back in the day, I remember growing up, like there used to be these crazy commercials of like if you smoke marijuana, that you know this is how you would look, and it would be like they created like a weird character. Let me let this play go. They created a character that's like all disinflated, like just pretend like if you had like a character balloon, like a balloon that was like a person, and then you popped it. You know what I'm saying? Like a blow up doll or something like that. Like it's all like flat and slinky, but like the person's face is still moving because they're actually alive. Like they used to have commercials back in the day where like a person would supposedly look like that if they was on drugs and stuff like that, like specifically on weed. So at the end there were different propagandas. Like if you watch the 13th documentary, like it kind of gives you a really good breakdown. It's on Netflix. But there's like in the documentary they show a part where like back in the day some guy was like, this is drugs, and basically he got like a frying pan that's like cooking. He's like, this is drugs, this is your brain, and he got an egg, and then he cracks the egg because the egg is your brain, and he's like, and then he puts it in the frying pan, and he's like, this is your brain on drugs. And it's like the analogies and the concepts they use were like very very primitive, you know what I'm saying? But the thing is, people bought it, people believed it, and the thing is, more than anybody, the Black and the Hispanic community, they believe this more than anyone. And so when the war on drugs was being promoted, because back then there wasn't social media, there wasn't Instagram, there wasn't like whatever the news said, that's what it was. And people don't realize that, a lot of these news corporations or companies, they're owned by the higher ups, they're owned by the people at the top. So they're going to present the news in a way that benefits them. You know what I'm saying? Because these politicians and, like all these elected officials, like they have some kind of investment in these corporations. That's why like Fox News, when you hear them talk, they're always defending Trump. And then when you see CNN, they're always bashing Trump. You know what I'm saying? And it's because regardless of the parties, like there's people from each party that owns or has some kind of stake in these different companies. So that's why like if let's say Joe Biden, he said, if you don't vote for him, you ain't Black, which is like the stupidest shit that he could have said in this moment, due to the fact is that
I can hear you, Professor.
give me a second. Okay. I just making sure because I had something pop up on my screen talking about the microphone isn't working. So you guys can't hear me.
Yeah, now we can.
Yes.
It cut off for like a few seconds.
Okay, all right, thank you. But yeah, like CNN, they because obviously they're Democrat, or they represent the Democratic Party. Like they say, yes, what Joe Biden said was highly inappropriate. But you know, we have to put it in this. It's important for you to understand the context. So you know, they take the time to like break everything down, explain everything about this candidate. But if it was somebody from the opposite side, they just flat out just drop that one clip with no context. Because at the end of the day, it still doesn't matter, but context does add, you know, to the understanding of why what was said was said. But it's all a game. So you know, at the end, during this time period, you had the news media outlets reporting however the hell they were told to report, and so because not everybody had access to social media, so you can't really see what's happening around the world at one time. Like you had to get it all in like little pockets or little snippets. It became a difficult thing for people to understand, like how to basically receive facts and things of that nature. Give me 1 second. All right. All right. So yeah, so basically it became very difficult for everybody to understand what was really happening, whether this war was real or not. Like if the news was reporting it, it was just real, and there was kind of just no, you know what I'm saying, no nothing around it. So give me 1 quick second. So you know that basically was the reality during that time. And you know, if it wasn't for social media, we would have never experienced what we're experiencing now with like protests and riots and stuff like that. I actually read that this is like the largest civil rights movement like globally, like in the history of the earth. You know what I'm saying? Because you have people not only across the United States, but you have people even in other countries, you know what I'm saying, who are protesting and who are standing up for some form of equality and speaking out against injustice and this and that. So, give me 1 second. What? In New York? Yeah. So that's something to keep in mind. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna share the screen, and basically we're gonna get into some of these different factors and facts. Give me 1 second. But one thing I do recommend when you have the free time, click on that first video link under Dope Game to basically assess the to basically see exactly how the war on drugs kind of like got into full effect, because the way that drugs got into this country at the time, President Reagan, he basically was fighting another kind of war against communists. And so Nicaragua had this group, well, they had this main group of communists called the Sandinistas. And, you know, for every dictatorship or for every major group, there's always like rebel groups, like little rebellious, like what's considered to be rebel groups, or groups that are against them. So there was a group called the Contras, which in Spanish, like they call it Contras because they're gringos trying to say a Spanish word in English, but really they're calling them the Contras, but in Spanish is really contra, which means against, or, you know, opposite of, or whatever. But basically you're going against it. So the Contras, they were a small little group of people. They were considered freedom fighters by the US because they were fighting against communism. And we've been taught since we was kids that communism in itself is bad, as opposed to communism, you know, under certain leaders is bad. The same way that democracy under certain leaders can also be bad, or like capitalism. Because ultimately, an idea in itself is just an idea. It doesn't hurt anybody. It's the people that take the idea and use it however they want. So in reality, maybe if capitalism, for example, was done differently, it would be effective, you know, but obviously in the way that it's practiced today, you have 1% of the United States owning the majority of the overall wealth in the country. So in that sense, obviously it doesn't turn out beneficial to everybody as a whole. But basically the Sandinistas were the communist group, the Contras were the small little rebel group, and the U.S. wanted to fund them. They wanted to help them out and support them because their mission at the time was to fight communists. And at the time, Iran, the country Iran, they basically had like 7 American hostages, like news reporters or something of that nature. And what ended up happening was they asked for, you know, in exchange for the hostages, you have to give us a certain amount of money and you have to provide us with weapons and military, you know, forces and stuff like that. Long story short, the U.S. was like, we don't negotiate with terrorists, this and that, but they still ended up giving in. Congress was saying, look, we're not going to pass this bill for you to fund, you know, the Contras or whatever, but basically like the president managed to like get around Congress, which, you know, because of that, he ended up, you know, being put on the stand and he had to testify. And, you know, several of his people ended up taking the blame instead of the president, and got in trouble for it. But the president basically decided, okay, I'm going to fund Iran. I'm going to give them about, I think it was $30 million, but almost like half, if not, I think a little more of that money, a little more than half of that money ended up going to the Contras. You know what I'm saying? And so Iran got their weapons, they got their money, and then some of that money went to the Contras. About half or more of that money went to the Contras. And the Contras used a lot of the funds to basically invest back in themselves. And the way that they were making money was selling drugs. And they were bringing drugs into the United States, the Contras. So that's how you started getting like cocaine and different stuff coming into the U.S. like originally. And, you know, obviously you have Pablo Escobar doing his thing somewhere else, but that played a big role in it as well because the CIA admitted later on that they actually were aware that this was happening. You know what I'm saying? But they didn't do anything about it. And these drugs were making their way mainly to Black and brown communities, you know. And once that ended up happening, it's like, obviously it became a ripple effect. It became, you know, a cycle where like one person is on drugs, another person's on drugs. Like the 80s was just a crazy time in regards to like, you know, drug abuse, people dying from drugs. I forgot the basketball player's name, but like once this famous basketball player, he was supposed to be like Michael Jordan's opposite. You know what I'm saying? He was supposed to be like what LeBron is to Kobe type stuff, like or like Stephen to like LeBron. Point is, he was supposed to be great, but he ended up dying from like cocaine overdose. And so that basically was used as like a reason to like really go in on the war on drugs. And since he was a Black basketball player, and everybody knew who he was because he was, you know what I'm saying, he was basically like on some celebrity status. It ended up convincing people from the Black and brown community like, hey, this is not good for us. We have to criminalize drugs. We have to criminalize people that sell it because we can't continue to go through this. But the reality is that instead of people that were selling it getting caught up only, a lot of people that were actually using it got caught up as well. You know what I'm saying? And so that's kind of what the issue is, because drugs in itself, it like the consumption of it is a willing act, you know, regardless of how sick and addicted the person is. That first instance of drug consumption had to be willing from the individual in most cases. So, you know, all of that played into like how the war on drug ended up unfolding. And it changed the dynamic of the United States, and especially for the Black and brown community. Because prior to all this, like in the 60s and 70s, what do you have going on in the Black community? Like what was happening in the 60s and in the 70s?
you had civil rights movements. So they try to oppress that. The government,
Exactly.
pushed for tougher sentencing laws and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, they just kept minorities down, people of color, blacks.
Exactly. So you basically had the civil rights movement, which, what I'm saying, that did so much for the US in general and the world in general. But obviously for the black community and of course the Hispanic community as well benefited tremendously from it. But you know, it was such a force to be reckoned with that they had to dismantle it, I guess, in different ways. And, what better way to destroy an empire than from the inside, or to destroy a community than from the inside? So, you had an era like the civil rights era where, that was a time where there were more uh, black PhD scholars than, any other part leading up to like the 2010s and stuff like that. So you had a lot of intelligent minds. Even if you talk about the Black Panther founder, Huey P. Newton, he had a PhD. They don't talk about that, but the dude had his academic credentials, you know what I'm saying? And he was somebody that he was illiterate until like his teens. Like he didn't know how to read. I don't know if it was that he didn't know how to read and write specifically, but from when I read his book, he was saying that he was illiterate and, all that stuff going even into his teens and stuff like that. So it's like he went from that to then being able to become a PhD scholar. And not only that, you have even Tupac's mother, Afeni Shakur. She's the only woman in history to like actually defend herself along with like 20 other people, who are all part of the Black Panther movement and basically like get themselves freed because they were supposed to be facing like 25 to life for a situation. And she actually she basically studied the law books and she basically was the representation for herself and for everybody else that was involved with her. And she got everybody off the hook. You know what I'm saying? So this was an era where like black intelligence, was like at its highest, you know what I'm saying? And so the war on drugs, not only did it create, crime and stuff like that because people are addicted. So like they're going to spend all their money on drugs. They're going to be poor. And if you're poor and you need drugs and you don't got a job, like you got to rob somebody, you got to kill somebody, like whatever the case is. So the fact of the matter is, like, this dynasty that was being developed, it got destroyed. You know what I'm saying? At least for that moment, you know what I'm saying? It got brought to its knees for that moment. And basically it made any progress in regards to civil rights or anything else kind of go downhill. And that's why you don't really see a lot of programs for drug rehabilitation, especially in black and brown communities, because it's like the moment that people can claim their rights, the moment that people can claim their mind, it's like that's when a revolution can start. That's why illiteracy was illegal. I mean, literacy was illegal in the world for such a long time because people already knew that knowledge was the key to freedom and to success and all this stuff. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna share the screen. Is our discussion leader present today or not? Okay, I'm gonna take that as a no. So I'm gonna share the screen. And basically I'm gonna run you through just a short timeline of the American war on drugs. In 1969, in a special message to Congress, President Richard Nixon identifies drug abuse as a serious national threat, citing a dramatic jump in drug-related juvenile arrests and street crime between 1960 and 1967. In 1971, Nixon officially declares a war on drugs, identifying drug abuse as public enemy number one. In 73, Nixon creates the DEA, Let's see. I'm gonna jump over a little bit. Right there on the right, you can see that's an image of Pablo Escobar. This was in 1989. That year, Forbes magazine listed him as the 7th richest man in the world. So Pablo Escobar was actually on Forbes magazine. I'm trying to figure out why all these other things didn't pop up. Okay. Let's see. In 1984, Nancy Reagan launches her Just Say No campaign. So basically, that was a campaign where she was saying, you know, just say no, like just say no to drugs and everything will be all right. But the reality is, okay, that's cool if you haven't been on drugs yet. Like nobody's saying that that's wrong or nobody's knocking it. But the reality is a lot of people are already on drugs. So what do you do with those individuals? How do you handle their health related situation? Because ultimately, once you're hooked on drugs, it's like it's very difficult for a lot of people to get off of it, especially, you know, specific kinds of drugs. Like marijuana has addictive substances to it. Obviously the THC, but it's something that it's not going to kill you at the very least. It's just going to affect your performance or your functionality throughout the day. Where other drugs that are addictive, they can actually kill you. You know what I'm saying? So at the end, that wasn't being addressed, and basically it was just a campaign to make people feel like the good guys and criminalize everybody else. In 1986, Reagan signs the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986, which appropriates over $1 billion to fight the drug war. The bill also creates mandatory minimum penalties for drug offenses, which are increasingly criticized for promoting significant racial disparities in the prison population because of the difference in sentencing for crack and powder cocaine. So for every, I think it was for like every 100 ounce of, let me see. Basically, crack and cocaine were not charged in the same way, even though crack is cocaine, but in a smokable form. And so cocaine, obviously you could smoke, but cocaine is usually found in what communities?
White. The powdered ones is white, and the crack is in black.
Exactly. So because of that difference, they actually went harder charging crack cocaine as opposed to just the powder cocaine, when in reality it's still the same drug being consumed in both, just in different forms. And so they charge, like, basically for the same amount of crack, or for every 1 ounce of crack, you needed about 100 times the amount of cocaine in order for that to be a chargeable offense. And so that basically showed the disparity between the white community and the black community, because in the black community, you're not going to get access to like just straight powdered coke. You know what I'm saying? Like, you gotta, that's the whole point why it was created into that rock form, because you can mix it with baking soda. Some people mix it with cement mix, like different stuff. And ultimately it still gets you your high. And if anything, it gets you your high even quicker, because it's going, you're smoking it and it's going straight to the brain. And so they obviously did the system in a way where it's going to focus more on the black community than anybody else. Let's see. In 1989, President George H.W. Bush creates the Office of National Drug Control Policy and appoints William Bennett as his first drug czar. Bennett aims to make drug abuse socially unacceptable. That same year, Forbes magazine listed Escobar, known for his bribes or bullets approach to doing business, as the 7th richest man in the world. So basically throughout the process, even into the 2000s, you have a whole bunch of different acts and policies being pushed around and passed in regards to like the war on drugs and continuing that war and things of that nature. Even to this day, the war on drugs is still actually a thing. You know what I'm saying? Nobody's actually calling it that, but the fact is, you still have the DEA cracking down on drug dealers. And the thing is, the whole purpose of the DEA is to crack down on big time drug dealers, but they're not really doing that. You know what I'm saying? Look at how long it took for them to even get El Chapo. Look at how long it took for them to, you know, crack down on like a Frank Lucas or, you know, Alpo Martinez or whoever, you know what I'm saying? So like at the end of the day, they focus on tracking the smaller level drug dealers, and maybe even like certain middlemen, but when it comes to getting the top dogs, they're rarely successful with it. So you have to now question their ability to actually perform their job the way that it's expected. You know what I'm saying? Like if you're a taxpayer and you're paying them money to do a certain job, the job needs to get done, because just like everybody else, when you go to work, you're getting paid because the expectation is you're going to do the job and you're going to do it successfully. On the federal level and just on any governmental level, like there's a lot of corruption, there's a lot of agendas going on left and right, and we're not going to know about every single situation until it comes out to light. But the fact of the matter is that it all plays a role in, you know, being able to crack down on somebody or not. Basically, this is what happens after a massive drug bust. They basically take the drugs and then they just torture it. When was this? This was 2016. Earlier this month, the Colombian National Police uncovered almost 9 tons of cocaine, some of it hidden in a chamber below a banana plantation. The series of seizures produced more than 17,500 pounds of blow, and Colombia's president Juan Manuel Santos boasted it was the biggest ever, tweeting that the operation represented a hit against criminals. Now, obviously, that's a big amount of production, but that's really not gonna dent anybody's pockets for too long. You know what I'm saying? Because there's so much production of drugs that it's like it kind of doesn't even matter at this point. Like that money's gonna be made right back. There's actually more cocaine on the planet at this point in time than there ever was before. You know what I'm saying? And so even during the time of Pablo Escobar, he actually owned 80% of the world's cocaine at the time. And so it's something to take into consideration when thinking about the war on drugs. Like, is it a war that's ever even going to come to an end? You know what I'm saying? Like 500 years from now, is the war going to be just as hard? You know what I'm saying? And again, a lot of it, we have the CIA to thank for it, at least here in the United States, because they allowed for certain drugs to make their way over to the US. And it's like, once you open that door, it's kind of like a Pandora's box. You're not going to be really able to close it. When we look at mass incarceration as a whole, basically, we've spoken about this before. You have over 2.3 million people behind bars. But if we look at the breakdown, whether it's local jails, federal prisons, state prisons, drug offenders make up a pretty significant number of these people. For the top 4 offenses in state prisons, drug offense makes up 191,000, you know, just for state prisons out of the almost a little over 1 million people. All right. And that could be between drug possession or, you know, selling or distributing the drugs and stuff like that. And the thing is, not every drug sale or every form of drug possession is a violent one. So that's something else to keep in mind. Like there's a difference between sentencing somebody for possessing drugs and then also for being a violent drug dealer. Those are 2 different kinds of scenarios. If you look at local jails, for the people convicted, drugs make up about 1/4 of the people that are convicted, like sitting in jails, like they already sat in the jail. Because there are certain jails that you can complete your sentence there. But the majority, or at least a good amount of jails, they're just holding facilities, right? So the other portion of it are the people not convicted. You have 120,000 out of 600,000+ that are basically in there for drug-related charges. And then when we look at federal prisons and jails, the majority of people that are in there convicted are there for drug charges. And so the feds basically, you know, they don't focus so much on violent and property offenses as much because they're not really trying to be known for like dealing with quote unquote imbecile kind of criminals or Neanderthal kind of criminals, basically people that don't think. The feds want to be looked at as like this tactical machine that, wow, we discovered the operations and the plans of, you know, of such and such, Juan Manuel, this and that, whatever his name is, you know, whatever the drug dealer's name is. And basically they, you know, they want to have those bragging rights of, oh, we cracked down on this operation. And when they say operation, that can mean so many things, because it could be just 3 people involved. You know what I'm saying? 3 people came up and decided, okay, we're going to make our own little thing or whatever. And they're not sent by nobody. It's just them doing it by themselves. And that's considered an operation. You know what I'm saying? So you got to take the terms lightly as well, because when people think of like, you know, not just operation, but even those 3, they're considered to be an organization. You know what I'm saying? So when they say, oh, we cracked down on this drug organization, this and that, you got to take that word lightly, because, you know, that's why I say criminal justice is about vocabulary and language, because ultimately, like, that could just be 3 people as opposed to like hundreds of people, the way that they might want to portray it. I'm not saying that it's like that all the time, you know, but there are instances, just like Mel, you was obviously in class for last semester. When I had the one guest speaker, and I'm gonna try and get him again for this class. I'm gonna see if he could come in via Zoom. He wasn't rolling deep. He wasn't like part of like a big, what's it called? Like a big spinning wheel of people, you know, like it was him and just a small group of people. And basically like he got charged as though he was part of an organization. And so at the end of the day, vocabulary and language plays a big role in all of this. This is basically just some stuff from the DEA. If you guys want to look over that whenever you got your own time. We're gonna jump over here to the 5 most notorious drug kingpins. So this is as of 2020, and this is from biography.com. Yeah. So obviously at the top you have Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. Basically, it kind of gives you like a little background as to who he is and all that. He's only 5'6" in height, middle age. You know, they're trying to like crack on him and make fun. They called him Shorty. But basically, he came up supposedly at some point from being growing up in the farms and stuff like that, and then at some point, obviously, he ended up getting himself to a point where he became one of the wealthiest people in the world. Now, obviously, Forbes is not going to put you up at that point, you know, because you're talking about 2 different eras. Like the 80s, I guess people just didn't care. But now Forbes is not really going to post you up there as like being one of the wealthiest in the world. In January 2017, the Mexican government extradited Guzman to the U.S. to face drug trafficking and other charges. Guzman appeared in the U.S. federal court and pleaded not guilty to over a dozen charges. In July 2019, El Chapo was sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years, along with ordering him to pay $12.6 billion in restitution. Obviously, you have Pablo Escobar. Some sources estimate that 80% of the cocaine imported into this country came through Escobar's enterprise. So that's what the 80% was, not the world's specifically, but the cocaine imported into this country. Some 15 tons per day at its peak. Escobar became one of the world's richest men, an estimated worth of nearly $10 billion. So you're talking about, this is like in the 80s, in the 70s and in the 80s. $10 billion is a lot today. You know what I'm saying? Back then, you know, I would say that's at least like 40, 50 billion, you know what I'm saying? Under today's money, probably even more. You had Griselda Blanco. A lot of people don't really know about her. Like now there's a rap group out there called Griselda, you know, because drug trafficking and distribution and stuff like that, that's usually mentioned in a lot of rap songs. Something to keep in mind is that she actually was one of the top queen pins in the world, all right? Blanco was one of the key figures in the Medellin cartel and has been credited with being a mentor to Escobar, who would eventually become her enemy. Blanco first made her name by developing bras and girdles designed to hide smuggled cocaine She left Colombia in the early 70s and settled in Queens, New York, when she set up a large-scale operation in 1975. She was indicted when the government intercepted a huge cocaine shipment. Blanco fled to Colombia, but it wasn't long before she returned, this time to Miami. And then here is getting into a couple of other individuals. Ociel, what's his name? Ociel Guillen. I'm not going to get into his case. You can look into it. I'm going to talk about Frank Lucas a little bit. I don't know if anybody's seen the movie American Gangster, featuring Denzel Washington, but this is who that movie is based off of. So he's actually a local drug dealer. He's from Harlem, specifically in New York. During the 80s, you know, if you've been in my corrections class before, and it's also in the syllabus, like if you go at the bottom of the war on drugs, or the dope game part of the syllabus, you'll see a link that lets you see basically a video that's letting Freeway Ricky Ross talk about his experience, because everybody knows the rapper Rick Ross, but Rick Ross actually took his name from the actual drug dealer Freeway Ricky Ross. So in the 80s, you had Freeway, you had Nicky Barnes, but you also had Frank Lucas, who at the time distributed his quote-unquote blue magic heroin throughout Harlem. You had Bumpy Johnson. You had a whole bunch of different individuals that, you know, were involved. And Lucas, you know, he ended up dying May of 2019, so just last year.
Professor.
Yeah.
In the movie, did he snitch at the end?
On Up in the Blue Seats. Should Rat Park's number be retired? Should Frank Boucher's number be retired? We asked Ranger beat writer Larry Bristol chat with Rangers great, a former teammate of mine, and a longtime MSG Network analyst, Dave Maloney. All that and more next on Up in the Blue Seats with the New York Post.
I'm trying to see if one of these is like playing something. Is somebody playing something on their side or?
No.
All right, what we say, Mel?
Yeah, at the end of the movie, did he snitch? Or he snitched in real life, didn't he?
Yeah, he snitched in real life. The thing about the drug game, obviously, is like there's codes and there's rules you're supposed to follow, even if they're like street codes and stuff like that. At the end of the day, people don't really talk about it because, you know, unless it becomes like a celebrity thing, like Tekashi 6ix9ine, or I'm not gonna get into it, but there's a lot of snitching that goes on in the streets, like, and so when people say Tekashi 6ix9ine's a snitch and this and that, yeah, he definitely is, but at the same time, like, he was never even about that life. There's dudes that are about that life that snitch all the time. If you get into the history of Alpo Martinez, who he's the guy that the movie Paid in Full is based off of. At one point in the movie, when you see the guy in the car, he's crying, and you know what I'm saying, he's supposed to be Richard Porter, because they're basically reenacting when Richard Porter found out that his brother got kidnapped. He was a baby boy. He was like 8 years old or something like that, the brother. He got kidnapped by this drug dealer, but he was also like a really bad dude. Like, he was also like a serial killer. This dude from the Bronx, his name is Preacher, the Black Hand of God. They took Richard Porter's brother, kidnapped him, and I think they cut off either a finger or his hand. I think it was a finger though, and they put it in a chicken nugget box and left it in McDonald's for him to find. And basically, you know, that they were saying you can have the rest of your brother, you know, if you provide us such and such amount of money and this and that. And so, unfortunately, Alpo, him and Richard Porter were like super close with each other, but Alpo felt like Richard was like getting him for some money or whatever, and he ended up killing his best friend. When Preacher found out that Richard Porter had died, he just ended up killing the little boy. You know what I'm saying? But like Preacher, he was one of the like he was one of the scariest figures in New York for a while. Like drug dealers, like big time drug dealers wasn't really messing around with him. But like when they, long story short, Preacher even took one of his closest peoples and took him to the basement and had him killed in the basement, chopped up, you know what I'm saying, put in the garbage bag, all this stuff. And he had this crew called the cleanup crew that basically like they, you know what I'm saying, they threw all types of chemicals on the floor to like leave no traces, this and that. This same dude had snitched on like different people, you know what I'm saying, so that he can get his sentence reduced, or I forgot what it was specifically he was trying to cop out to or whatnot. But this dude that was a serial killer, and he had killed, you know, like he had killed the brother of like a little kid of one of the biggest drug hustlers in New York. He was snitching, you know what I'm saying. Alpo, he was also a snitch. You know what I'm saying? And Alpo, he killed his best friend, and he also went down to Washington, D.C. Like, and they talk about it in Paid in Full also. But he went down to Washington, D.C. and he became cool with this guy named Wayne Perry. And Wayne Perry, like, yo, if you Google him, like law enforcement considers him to be like the Michael Jordan of homicides. Like this dude has like over 50 bodies on him easily. You know what I'm saying? But like Alpo ended up snitching on different stuff or whatever. So he's still alive, Alpo Martinez. Supposedly he's been seen around in Harlem, but like nobody respects him now because obviously the snitch code, you know, is taken seriously by the streets and stuff like that. So yeah, Frank Lucas snitched, but snitching has been part of the game for the longest. You know what I'm saying? Even if you look into like certain Italian mafias and stuff like that, snitching happens in there too all the time. So it's kind of nothing new. More and more ordinary people, elected officials, newspaper columnists, economists, doctors, judges, and even the Surgeon General of the U.S. are concluding that the effects of our drug control policy are at least as harmful as the effects of drugs themselves. So this is coming from the ACLU, basically stating that the policies that come around as a result of all these drug implementations, or to keep drugs out of the community, all of this actually ends up hurting the community even more than drugs itself. Since 1981, tax dollars to the tune, criminal prohibition, the centerpiece of U.S. drug policy, has failed miserably since 1981. Tax dollars to the tune of $150 billion have been spent trying to prevent Colombian cocaine, Burmese heroin, and Jamaican marijuana from penetrating our borders. Yet the evidence is that for every ton seized, hundreds more get through. Hundreds of thousands of other law-abiding people have been arrested and jailed for drug possession. Between 1968 and 1992, the annual number of drug-related arrests increased from 200,000 to over 1 million. 1/3 of those were marijuana arrests, most for mere possession. So, as I was saying earlier, like there's a lot of ineffectiveness in how the government has handled the war on drugs. They claim that, you know, they're putting a stop to it, but in reality, it's all lip service. And we've had since the 80s, you know, to kind of already deal with this experiment. It's already been basically about 40 plus years, you know, and you're still seeing the same result. And what did Einstein say? Insanity is when you do the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. It's not working at this point. It's not going to work to continue to criminalize it. Like there has to be another, you know, perspective that needs to get taken. Like, for example, Mexico, and you know, everybody has to figure out what makes sense for them, right? But Mexico actually legalized cocaine for medicinal purposes, because cocaine, if you put it on your gums, it actually numbs your gums. So the point of that, or me stating that, is like if you use it for like medicinal purposes, let's say you gotta, you know, numb somebody real quick or whatever, you can do that without putting anesthesia on them, risking them potentially not waking up from it. You know what I'm saying? So things like that. Obviously, we have medicinal marijuana now, but federally speaking, marijuana is still illegal. You know what I'm saying? Even though California, Colorado, a bunch of different states have legalized it to whatever degree, recreationally or medicinally, the fact of the matter is the federal government doesn't recognize it as a legal drug. So if they wanted to, they can still crack down on some of these businesses. Obviously, they'll probably target Black and brown businesses more. That plays a big role as to why in the marijuana industry, like in the legal marijuana industry, there's a underrepresentation and like a huge underrepresentation of people of color in the industry, even though they make up most people, like they make up a large portion of the people that are locked up for marijuana. You know what I'm saying? The white community has over 80% ownership of the marijuana industry, which is insane because it's like people have been getting locked up for this forever now. And at the very least, you can allow these people to make legal money off of it now, but it's still going to the white man or to the white person or whatever. So, you know, it kind of just shows the racial inequality that still happens in this country, not only from a police brutality perspective, but even from a policy perspective. And this is one more example I'll show you, and then I gotta head out. But basically, there was a situation last year where the feds actually found a ship that had originally an estimate of $1 billion worth of cocaine, and it was on a ship owned by J.P. Morgan. All right, that headline in itself is pretty much everything you need to know about this war on drugs. J.P. Morgan, they're still operating, they're still around even after this situation. This happened just last year in the summer. And yeah, it hasn't even been a full year yet, actually, when that situation happened. And basically, they found so much drugs that they said that it was the equivalent of like 7 or 9 African elephants. You know what I'm saying? That's how much the drugs were. You know, once they did a reassessment of the drugs and how much they suspected that it was worth, basically they said that it was about maybe $500 million, like 500 million around there plus or whatever. At the end of the day, that's still a lot of cocaine. You know what I'm saying? And they found this in the dock in Philadelphia, on a ship that was owned by J.P. Morgan. Like J.P. Morgan had part ownership of that ship. And now the question has to be asked is, do you really think J.P. Morgan is not going to know what is on their ship? I mean, it's pretty hard to believe, you know what I'm saying? If a financial firm that does audits and checks every single comma and number so that they could continue to get their finances and revenue up, you know what I'm saying? If they do that with their finances, why and how is it possible that they can be this, you know, unaware of millions of dollars, if not $1 billion worth of drugs being found in their ship? It's kind of hard to believe, you know, but obviously this kind of goes back to the idea that I mentioned earlier, that politicians and a lot of corporations, they tangle with each other, you know what I'm saying? They get involved with each other and it all ends up kind of coming back full circle. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna end today early. What I want you to do is at least click on the videos, click on the Iran-Contra scandal video. It's only like 5 minutes. And click on the video at the bottom of the dope game part of the syllabus. And listen to what Freeway Ricky Ross has to say. He's actually the person that's what's it called? That I told you that Rick Ross named himself after. And Freeway actually tried to get his name back from Rick Ross. Like he tried to sue Rick Ross for using his name, but unfortunately he wasn't successful in it. But you know, Freeway is still out here like like doing, like now he's doing a lot of positive things, you know, getting involved with the community, and, you know, now he's working with like the CBD industry and stuff like that. So still working with drugs to an extent, you know, like it's like why switch up the recipe if it worked for you at one point, and now you can do it legally, right? But at the very least, like he's come to a point where he's acknowledged how he played a role in the crack epidemic, and you know, his life pretty much has turned around for the better for the most part. I'm gonna open it up to a couple of questions. Does anybody have anything they want to add to this?
You think we Gucci?
No.
Gotcha. All right, so I'm gonna just let y'all go through those videos. Obviously, if you plan on doing the assignment, you know what I'm saying, those videos are definitely gonna help. But in the meantime, I'm gonna catch you tomorrow. If there's any changes, you know, in schedule, like on mine or whatever, I'll keep you posted, because I don't land in New York until like later tonight, like pretty late in the night or whatever. So I'm gonna keep you posted on stuff. And if you got any questions, just, you know what I'm saying, hit me through IG or send me an email or something like that. All right.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So enjoy your day and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you. You too.
All right.
You too.